Hey everybody, today we're going to dive into Cinema 4D by Maxon. Now Cinema 4D is a 3D modeling program, and I know what you may be thinking. Chad, I don't know if I can do 3D modeling. It seems like it's very intense and very challenging and creative, and I don't know if I have that artistic ability. And I know exactly how you feel because I was the exact same way. I started out as a video editor learning Avid and Premiere, and I was doing that for a while, and then eventually I jumped into Adobe After Effects. I thought, oh, visual effects, it's kind of scary and overwhelming, but I took it slow and I worked through and I got really good at After Effects, and so I was really confident about that. But then always kind of in the corner was this idea of 3D modeling. I don't know, that's a whole nother set of skills that I was afraid to learn. You know, I had experimented with Maya and 3D Studio Max, which are both great programs. And by experimented, I mostly meant I opened up the program, looked at it, got scared to death and said, I don't know how to do this. This takes artistic people to do, and I'm not artistic people. I'm not even smart. So I said, you know what, skip it and walk away. But the truth is, I was afraid of those programs because I didn't have anybody to teach me how to use them. I never sat down with a course. I never had a mentor for those courses. I never even looked at a YouTube video on how to make those applications work. And so, yeah, they were overwhelming. And they also had this thing in the back of my head that said, I'm not creative or artistic and I can't do this. Well, eventually I sat down for a 4-hour class on Cinema 4D. I was at a conference and I sat down and I learned how to make, well, I made a pen cap. I know, that was it. I would learn how to make a pen cap. And I thought, oh my God, look at this pen cap. It's amazing. I have made the most amazing pen cap in the world. It was fantastic, and I was brilliant and creative and genius, and I was showing everybody my pen cap. It was wonderful. And again, it wasn't that great, but I learned how to make something. And so we're going to explore, and we're going to learn how to make some things. We're going to learn to make some simple things and learn how to make some advanced things, and then maybe we'll go into some animation and some visual effects, and then we'll learn how Adobe After Effects and Cinema 4D partner together, because that's one of the great things about Cinema 4D, and that's one of the things I love about the software, is that it partners with After Effects so well. So if you're familiar with using After Effects, or if you watch my tutorials on how to use After Effects, we'll eventually give a lesson on how to combine After Effects and Cinema 4D together. It'll be kind of cool. In the meantime, I'm not an expert on Cinema 4D. I'm not certified in Cinema 4D. There are very few people who are. Cinema 4D is a very robust program, and I'm still learning new things every day. But I can work my way through the system, and I can do some kind of cool things that I hope that I can show to you and break it down really easy. It's a really easy program to learn. It makes a lot of sense. It's one of the most intuitive software that I've ever used. I really like it, and I've really fallen in love with 3D modeling. I really have a lot of fun doing it and learning new things. So if you want to broaden your horizons, let's sit down, we'll do some lessons, and we'll learn some new things. All right? Let's get started. I'm really excited. Let's see. Hopefully you're excited too. We're going to go in here and open Cinema 4D for the first time on this system, and it's going to load up the welcome splash screen, and we'll take a look at how Cinema 4D looks, and it'll be pretty fun. Immediately, you're going to see a quick start dialog that's going to come up in the front. I'm going to tell you some things about new features and new things. You can open different recently opened things from here, but you know, we're going to say let's skip this down and just get rid of it. You can notice down here in the bottom, you can kind of hide this if you don't want it, but we'll get rid of this and we'll just open up to the Cinema 4D default screen. You'll see up in the top corner there are a couple different workspaces or a couple modes of working. This is standard mode, and we have standard. There's also model mode and sculpt mode and UV edit mode and paint mode, etc. and groom, track, script, node, and there's actually a couple more in here that you can actually there, and you can create your own modes if you wanted to. But for now, we're going to work in standard mode, and we're going to sit here in standard and work that way. Now you'll see a couple different screens here. This is the main screen. This is called the perspective view of the main screen here, and you see that you have kind of a 3D angled view here of the work plane here. In the corner you'll see different things that Maxon calls managers, as opposed to tabs or windows or whatever controls or whatever. They have managers. So up here we have an objects manager and a takes manager next to it, and down here we have an attributes manager and a layers manager next to it, and so these are called managers. And if you went to the Windows menu, you could see Windows and see different managers that you could have: a materials manager and a picture viewer manager and a coordinates manager and a structure manager. They love the term managers. I don't know, it's just a different way of working. And so you have those different controls there. This is the basic interface. On the side, you have this objects manager and this attributes manager, which we're going to talk about a lot today. And up top, you have some controls and different features. And then over here on the side, you have some buttons as well. Notice across the main tab you have a main row of menu items. So you have a group of menu items like File, Create, Mode, Select, Tracker, Render, etc. And then down here you also have a little subset of menus of View, Camera, Display options. And this is for how this view works. So we have this view here in this project like so. So this is the default layout of how Cinema 4D looks. Before we go any further, I wanted to show you something really quickly. In the Attributes Manager, there's nothing here. When we first loaded up, there was something in the Attributes Manager. Now, if I wanted to, I could quit really quick and hit Command Q and quit out of here, and then load up Cinema 4D again, just for fun. We'll just let it close and then open it up again, which is going to show the splash screen again, the really exciting 2023 splash screen. And then once it loads up and once it opens up, you'll see the Quick Start dialog box we didn't get rid of. And then over here, you'll see a series of attributes called the project attributes. And these are the project attributes that load up automatically. These are something you may want to take a look at and see how the project is laid out and things you want to do, especially if you're working between Adobe After Effects or some other video editing software and you're working inside of Cinema 4D and you're trying to relate those back to each other. You're working with 3D models for the intent of using them with video. This may be something you want to consider, something you want to look at. So that is called the project attributes. If you click somewhere, and I will warn you of this, Cinema 4D tends to be one of the most context-sensitive software out there. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is once you click on something, it changes a bunch of things and how the system works. So certain things work when you're on this screen, when you're clicked on this screen over here, and certain things work when you're clicked on this screen over here. And if you're clicked on a tool, certain things will work differently. So you'll notice that immediately, as soon as I went to a different mode, like the model mode, these attributes went away. Oh, because it doesn't care anymore. It's like, hey, we're moving on to the modeling mode. Sculpt mode, you get different attributes and different screens. Now you get sculpting layers here, and it moves the screen. This will happen often in Cinema 4D. As you grab something or as you click on something, all of a sudden things disappear. Now I don't want to have to open up Cinema 4D again, so I'm going to go to, in here, Edit menu, and go to Project Settings, and the shortcut is Command D. So here, Project Settings is under the Edit menu. Here we go, Project Settings, Command D, and I'll choose those, and that will hop up again. But again, if I click away from them and click on something else, I'm going to lose them, and oh, where did my project settings go? Well, I'm in some new screen. If I go back to Standard, they're not there anymore. So Command D, boom, they show up, and they give me the project settings. So now let's talk about the project settings, or at least some of the project settings, and how they work. So immediately we see that in the project settings, there is a frames per second. FPS right now is in 30 frames per second. Well, if you're working with video and you're working at 24 frames a second, heck, this may be something you want to change immediately. So let's change this to 24, because I'm going to work in 24 frames per second. Now it says the project time is 0 frames to 72 frames. Cinema 4D will count in frames, not in time code or not in some other unit of measure. By default, it will count in frames. And so it's saying 0 to 72 frames. Now if you're doing the math, 24 frames a second, 0 to 72 means that this timeline down here, which we'll talk about at some future lesson, will play for 3 seconds. And this will play for roughly about 3 seconds. So now we may want to change this to a different amount of time. We may say, hey, 3 seconds is too short. I'm going to do some animation that's going to need something longer. And here, I'm going to go here from the max time, minimum time is 0, to, I don't know, 240. That would be 10 seconds. Actually, technically, that would be 10 seconds and 1 frame because it starts at 0. And so if you're counting 0, I don't know, you do the math there. So 239 would literally be the max. So now we have this playing for 10 seconds, like so, across the board here. So we just set a 10-second, 24 frame per second project. Okay, some other things to consider here. We have some other things in the project controls. There's the info control, which is cute. You can type in a name of the author of this if you want to create an author name and copyright information and some other info you want to have in there. And it tells you what file version it is and some information there. That's fun stuff. And there's some other things about how Cineware works. This is how this relates back to After Effects. If you're working between Cinema 4D and After Effects, there's some things there. There's also a to-do menu. You can actually have a to-do list and create different tasks in a to-do list. It's adorable. It's great. But the one I want to look at here specifically is the animation controls. Right now, the animation controls, you'll notice the type is set to spline. Well, what does spline mean? Spline means that when I animate something, and really quick, I'm just going to really quick animate something just to show you an idea. If I took a cube, for example, and now we're jumping ahead here, so just work with me, trust that I'm going to show you how all this works later on. But if I were to create a cube here, and in here I was to create a cube, and this cube looked like this, and the cube was moving horizontally. And let's say, for example, I had this cube here, and I had the cube over here like this, and I said add a keyframe to here, and then I moved to, say, 2 seconds later, and I moved this over to here, and I added a keyframe over here like this, and boom, I created some kind of animation. Well, this animation across the 2 seconds will have spline animation. And what does that mean? That means it will speed up and slow down. So that's going to speed up and slow down. And you can almost see this nature of kind of speeding up and slowing down. In Adobe After Effects, we call this ease. So it applies ease. That's what Cinema 4D does automatically. Automatically, it applies ease to this, which is not necessarily something I want. So I may want to say, hey, by default, I don't want ease. Ease is adorable. It's great, but I'm going to hit Command D, and we're going to go to animation, and I'm going to switch my animation to linear. And linear means that it will not apply any ease to this. It will not speed up or slow down as it plays. It will go at a standard rate of speed here, like so. So that may be something. The frame rate, the max time, and I always set my animation to linear by default. Later on, if I want to, I can apply some kind of ease to this, but for now, just going to leave it at standard speed, leave it at normal speed as we go. So there we have it like there. I'll go to the View menu and do Frame Default, so we're back to this layout and how it looks. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Again, I'm sorry. I have to show you some things that are going to be jump ahead, and you're going to be like, well, what is all this stuff? What does all this stuff do? We'll talk about it. I promise we'll talk about it. But here's another thing. In here, you will see a render menu, and in the render menu, you'll see a series of render settings. Edit render settings. The shortcut is Command B. So edit render settings. Render settings? What are you talking about, Chad? We're talking about render settings already? Yeah, maybe. Just for fun, we'll go talk about render settings. So Command B, edit render settings. You can also get that by hitting this button right here. It's a tiny little button. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see this button here. This little button here says edit render settings. It looks like a folder with some lines over it with a little sprocket there. It's adorable. We'll zoom back out here and we'll see, and we'll hit this button here, and we'll open up the render settings. Okay, I don't want to go into all these render settings. I know, this is for much later. We're nowhere near rendering, but I do want to make a point of this. If you open up the render settings, one of the first things you'll notice is that the default size for this is 1280 by 720. This is like old school HD, 1280 by 720. This is like the first HD back in 1993 or 1991 or some year. This is how big this screen is by default. Now, obviously, this is changeable after the fact, but you know what? Let's just change this now, just so we know that what we're looking at here is not a 1280 by 720 image. You could change this to some other resolution, but there is a pull-down menu right here, and this pull-down menu will give you film and video, and you will see HDTV 1080 24. Again, if we're working at 24 frames a second, right now, this is doing 1280 by 720, and the frame rate is 30. But Chad, you said I changed this to 24, and you did. You changed it to 24, but tricky thing, when this exports, or when this renders out, this will render out at 30 frames a second. We don't want to do that. So let's just make sure. I know I'm just crazy, and I just want to worry about this now. We're going to switch this to HD 1080 24, and now it's coming in at 1920 by 1080 at 24 frames a second. Will that change any of the way the screen looks? No, it's still 60 by 9, so it's still coming in at a standard thing here, and it won't really make a difference. We could fix this later on, but I just like to do this by default so I don't have to worry about this later on. Now, we haven't done anything yet. I know, we haven't even done anything. I did a little something before because I was showing you an example of something, but we haven't really done anything yet. But I'm going to show you a trick right now. I'm immediately going to show you a trick. Watch this trick. Right now, this is called Untitled 1. And so this assignment, or this project here, is called Untitled 1 here. And so we're going to change this. We're going to go to File, Save, and we're going to go to File, and we're going to save project. Command S, Command S, save project. We haven't done anything, Chad. Why are we saving this project? Well, I'll show you a trick. Watch this. I'll hit Save Project, and I'm going to rename this project. I'm going to go to the desktop here. We'll open this up and go to the desktop here, and I'm going to rename this and call this New. NEW. Really easy. New.c4d right there. On the desktop, I'm going to call this New.c4d and save this. And now it's going to be called New.c4d. And I'm going to hop out of Cinema 4D. So we're going to go to File, Quit, or Cinema 4D, Quit. Quit Cinema 4D, Command Q. We're going to hop out of Cinema 4D, and you're going to see this little file here called New.c4d. Right there. New.c4d. Really easy, really simple there. Now, here's the trick. We're going to open up the computer. And we're going to go here to Applications. And we're going to Applications. And in Applications, I'm going to find the new version of Maxon Cinema 4D. Here's Maxon Cinema 4D 2023, the brand new version here. And inside of here, Maxon Cinema 4D 2023 has a whole bunch of files and a whole bunch of folders. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab New, I'm going to throw it in there. It's going to ask me to make sure I can do this because I'm putting something in the Applications folder. So I'm going to type in my password to make sure I can do this, and it's going to allow me to do this. And now new.c4d is in there, living inside of there. This file, this new.c4d, is just living there. And now you know what? Every time I open up Cinema 4D now, Cinema 4D is going to open up exactly the same way that I set it before when I set that new project. So now it's going to open up at 1920 by 1080, at 24 frames a second, at 0 to 239. It's going to be perfectly the same, exactly the way I set everything up, exactly what I want. So if I make a whole bunch of changes here, if I just save a file for my default of call it new, it's now, this one's called Untitled 1. So this is Untitled 1. This is a brand new one. But the default, how it loads up, is set there. You just create a Cinema 4D project, call it new, new.c4d, and it just loads up that way automatically there. Really simple, really straightforward. It's really, and it's cool. So you just have a new, and any changes you make to this system, if you want it to be like, if you wanted to even have something loaded up on the screen when you opened up, like you had a different model, you could put that model on there, and it would just load up every single time. So some people will be like, oh, I want a cube loaded up on my screen in the center every time I open up Cinema 4D, or I want a material built in there every time I open up Cinema 4D. Build it and then call it new, and then it's there. It's amazing. All right, so let's look at some of the tools we have here. So let's start working with some models and working at some ideas of things we can do here. So up here, you will see a control that says cube, and we're going to create a cube. I hit this button before when I was demoing some stuff, but we're going to hit this button and create a cube, and I'm going to create a cube, and automatically a couple things are going to happen. So this cube is going to load up, boom, it's going to put a cube there, and then it's going to show a cube up in the objects because this cube is now an object. So up here, we have objects and have cube. And down here, now that we're clicked on the cube, you will see attributes for the cube. Oh my God, there are some attributes for the cube. Amazing, fantastic. We have attributes for the cube. You could have also gotten that by going to the menu up here, create, mesh, cube, and you could have done that way. You could have done create, mesh, and cube, and you could have grabbed it that way. But who wants to go to a menu to pull down? You have a button right here. It's going to create a cube automatically. All right, so let's look at the cube here. We're going to click on the cube, and if we click here, we can go into the attributes here, and there are 4 sets of attributes, one called basic, one called coordinates, one called object, and one called a Phong. We might talk about a Phong at some other point, but we'll look at the basic attributes here automatically. Okay, so the basic attributes here automatically, so we have a cube up here. There's a name for the cube, and we can call the name for the cube, we'll call the cube Steve. And we're just going to click here and call him Steve, and this is Steve the cube. And so automatically up here, it's called Steve up here, and now we click on it, and we have Steve the cube. There's a layer control, which we can talk about at some other time, but for now, we're going to talk about viewport visibility and renderer visibility. And right now, there are 3 settings. There is on, off, on visible, off, not visible, and default. And you're like, Chad, this is crazy. Why is it on, off, and default? I mean, wouldn't on and default are the same thing, so why do we have both? Why is there both? Well, Cinema 4D is trying to be nice to you. It considers that certain things are on by default, certain things are off by default, and it has a default setting. And this, the cube, is on by default. Certain other things you're going to see are going to be off by default. And it says, hey, let's give you the option that you can reset everything back to its defaults. And then if it was on, you could have it on, and if it was off by default, you could have it off, and you can go through and set everything to its defaults there like so. So it gives you these 3 options: default, on, or off. I guess if you really wanted to, you could turn it on, but default's going to do the same thing. It's going to be there. Now you have a control here called viewport visibility and one here called renderer visibility. Well, what's the difference between viewport visibility and renderer visibility? Why do we have both here? Well, here's the trick. You have this control called the viewport, and this screen that we're looking at is called the viewport. Again, we're in perspective viewport, but this is the viewport here. But I didn't mention that before. This little screen, this work screen here is called the viewport. And inside this viewport, we can look at things. We can see things that are visible on or not visible off. There's also a thing called renderer view, and that is this button right here. Now, if you hover over this button right here and you get really close, this is next to the render settings. This is called render to the view, and the shortcut is Command R. So Command B was render settings, Command R is render to the view. And what does render to the view do? Well, it does a really quick, easy kind of render. So we hit here and hit Command R, and all of a sudden my screen doesn't look like this with the work playing in the background and the axis here and all the controls and all the things. We just hit Command R and boom, it looks, oh, look how pretty that looks. Oh, look how pretty and wonderful that looks. That's amazing. Oh, it looks so nice. Now, that's really simple because now all we have to do here is just click away from this and click anywhere and click here, and it goes away. So Command R, boom. And I mean, that looks arguably the same. I mean, it's basically this. I mean, the cube looks the same. It's just a nicer way of looking at it. As we get more complex, and we add shadows and we add lights and we add all kinds of things, backgrounds, etc., this render will get a little bit more complicated. So this render view may take some time as we start to do more things to this. But for now, yeah, we can see this, we can see this, we can see it in a prettier view. Well, there may be an occasion that sometimes you don't want to see Steve right now. Steve is off, but when you render it, you do want to see it in the renderer. So you're not seeing it because you're trying to work and Steve's in the way and he's just blocking something else that you're trying to look at and trying to work. But ultimately, when you render, oh, we want to see Steve. We do want to see Steve. And so you can turn that on or turn that off to not see Steve here, but see him here. Or vice versa. We can see him here, but then when we render, we don't need to see him when we render. So now we hit render, and now it's just a black screen. So we can turn him on, turn him off, have him visible or not visible, depending on what we're doing and how we're working. For now, we're going to leave this default, and we're going to have this here. So now we have viewport visibility and renderer visibility, and then beneath that, we have enabled. What the heck does enabled mean? Well, enabled means, well, now he's not visible in either. He's not visible here, he's not visible there. And so here, he's not visible here. If we render, he's also gone. So here, this does everything. Well, if I have viewport visibility and I have render visibility, what the heck is enabled? Well, here's a weird idea. If you think about certain things in life, certain things exist. They do certain things. They are enabled. They are doing something. Think about gravity. Can you see gravity? No, but you know it's working, right? Well, sometimes you can have things that are off, not visible. So they are invisible, but they are working. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means Steve does exist. Even though we can't see him, even though in either view we can't see him, he does still exist. He's still doing stuff. Now, for a cube, that really doesn't really matter. It's not really as important. But for certain things that will have some interactions, like an invisible wall that we can bounce into, yeah, Steve may be valuable. Steve may be valuable there. Or we could have Steve not be valuable and have him disabled, so he's not doing anything. So the math inside of Cinema 4D, the computer inside of Cinema 4D, the engine, is not doing anything right now when it's not enabled. Here, when this is enabled, the engine is in fact doing something. It does have controls there. Beneath this, we have a control for display color. And display color is usually just the default display color, but we could actually add a custom color to this right here, and we could say, oh no, we want Steve to be red in this thing. Now later on, we're going to talk about materials and adjust this for materials, but we're going to say default material here. It's going to just have the display color. There's another option here for X-ray. Sometimes I just want to be able to see this semi-transparent so I can see sort of behind it. So you can see sort of behind this. If you look closely, you can see sort of through this. We'll look at this when we look at some other objects, but you do have this X-ray function to see this like here. So that's it for the basic controls there. And so we have some basic controls. That took a little second, but we'll go into some other things. Next that, we have coordinate controls. And now we're in coordinate controls, and we'll look at this in terms of coordinate controls. So we have in the first column of coordinate controls, we have the P for position. So here we have P, position, and we have X, Y, and Z coordinates. This is measuring in centimeters. It's measuring in centimeters because Command D, if you remember in your project settings, we have the scale, and the scale is set to 1 centimeter. You can set it to some other unit of measure, but it will measure in actual units of measure. Why? Well, because beyond, pixels, architecture, and different people who do interior design or something will want to use Cinema 4D as a modeling tool to actually build actual things, to build physical things. So if you're building something, you have it there. Let's click back on Steve so we see Steve's attributes. And now we have Steve attributes, and you have coordinates. And you'll see that right now we're looking at this cube from a bit of an angle. Here's your x-axis, here's your y-axis, and here's your z-axis. You can see that on the plane here, like so. Now you'll notice that they have little arrows, and we can grab these arrows and we can pull. If we hover over the arrows, you will see the little arrows will turn from their color to white. And so here we can drag and we can pull this about 59.66955 centimeters. So we pulled that over this way here like so. So obviously we have a couple different controls. We can click on this, we can hit 0 and move this back to 0. We can click and drag the y-axis and pull this up or down. And we can move this up 95 centimeters. Again, we can click this and hit 0 and pull it there like so. And the z-axis we can pull here and pull the z-axis like so and pull this forward, negative 104 pixels or 104 centimeters, and go back to 0, and we're back to here like so. And so now we have these controls here. We can also click and grab here and hold, like in After Effects, we can pull left and right and pull there like so. We can click and drag and pull there. We can type in numbers. We can type 100 on the X and 200 on the Y and 500 on the Z and type in numbers and put them there like so. Again, we can hit 0, tab 0, tab 0 and put them back to center and have these numbers like so. You can also click this and hit the up and down arrows and go in small mini increments or hold in the shift key and go in bigger increments like so. And so you have those controls there available to you to go in different sizes and different increments there like so. You'll also see that if you go between the X and Z, you'll see this little green guy. And this green guy will pull either left and right on the X or up and down on the Z. And so you can pull this way or this way, and you can pull on the Z or pull on the X, but not on the Y. So you have those two controls. You'll see that it's manipulating the X and Z, but not the Y. So this is kind of moving across the ground, basically not raising or lowering this any bit whatsoever. In addition, I'll just zero these out. Up here, we have this blue guy, and the blue guy will pull on the Y and on the X, but not on the Z. So you have that control. And then lastly, the red guy will pull on the Y and Z, but not on the X. So you can't go left and right. You can only go up or back. And so you have those controls there. So you have that there like so. Or if you wanted to, you could also, I know this is crazy, but you could grab this and pull and move this in all kinds of directions. But now I don't know whether I'm pulling it back or up or back, and it's hard to tell. I have to look at the X, Y, and Z controls over there, but it's kind of arbitrary of where I'm pulling. Some people like to do this. I'm not a big fan because it's a little bit weird. So those are my X, Y, and Z coordinates. I have those controls there. Next, over here, I have rotation controls, and rotation controls are set to HPB. What the heck is HPB? Why is there HPB? What does that mean? Sounds like a disorder or disease or something. Yeah, caught a case of HPB or something. I don't know. What is that about? Well, here's the thing. If you've ever flown a plane before, I've flown a plane before. If you've ever flown a plane before, you might see that you might have HPB controls. And if you've ever flown a plane before, you have controls for rotation. And your rotation controls have a couple different controls. So imagine if we have a plane here. We'll just make this look like this, and we'll have a plane here. And in this plane here, we have some controls for moving our plane. And our plane here, flying a plane, we would have controls for heading, to adjust our heading. You would adjust the rudder pedals to adjust your heading. So you could move your heading using the rudder pedals. And so, if you could do that, you could adjust your heading. If you used your elevator, you could adjust your pitch. And so your elevator would adjust your pitch. So you have heading and pitch. And then lastly, you can move your ailerons, and your ailerons will turn the yoke left and right, and then you can move your ailerons and you can change your bank angle. So heading, pitch, and bank. Okay, now I know the question is, well, a couple questions. One, how do I do this, manipulate this directly in the controls? Well, what I didn't mention was that by default, when Cinema 4D opens up, it opens up in the Move tool, and the Move tool is right here. So this tool right here is the Move tool, and we've been in the Move tool. This gives us our arrows here that we can move this accordingly like so, and we have those controls there. If I click Next, we have our rotation controls, and you hit the R key, and it'll give us rotation controls. You'll see in small little letters next to the word rotate, it'll tell you that these are the rotation controls, and we have a little bit of rotation controls. The R key is there for rotation controls, which would give us direct controls to change our heading, our pitch, and our bank. So we have those controls there. E will be our move tool. So go back to our move tool. You'll see when I hover over the move tool, you'll see in small letters it will say E for move tool, and then next it will say E for move tool, and then R for rotation. It'll adjust the rotation. And so we have those controls to adjust the rotation there like so. We're going to hit undo a whole bunch of times and go back to a standard cube. I did a little bit to manipulate the cube to make it look more like a plane. So I'm going to undo a whole bunch of times, and then boom, we're back to a plane here. So E for move, R for rotation there. Now the question you're going to ask yourself is, why is rotation set to heading, pitch, and bank? I mean, you know, I grew up on X, Y, and Z. I was used to X, Y, and Z. Well, why? You know what? I'm going to say why not. You know, you've been working in X, Y, and Z axis your whole life. You've been loving X, Y, and Z. You've never tried anything different. You know, you got to try something new. You got to do something different every now and then. You know, and so Cinema 4D decided to do something different. They decided to work their magic and decide to have rotation be in a different unit of measure, a heading, a pitch, and a bank. Why? I don't know, maybe because they like pilots and they like flying planes. I like flying planes. It's kind of fun. But we have heading, pitch, and bank in a rotation. Now, if you're boring, and I'm going to say it, I'm going to call you out. If you're boring, you say, hey, you know what? I like boring. I'm good with boring. I'm happy to be boring. You can go here, and you can switch your rotation order back to X, Y, and Z. Does that make you feel better? Does that make you feel better to have the X-axis and the Y-axis and the Z-axis? Is that normal? Yeah. You could have had something fancy. You could have done something different. You could have tried something new off the menu, but you're a traditionalist. You like the turkey club sandwich. You're going to go with something basic. You know, try out HPB. Just try it. Try it out. Experiment. Maybe you'll learn to like it. Maybe you'll learn to experience it and appreciate it for what it is. It might be something cool. Okay. Lastly, we have scale controls. And you'll notice here that scale controls are set to X, Y, and Z. So thankfully, nothing's weird about that. We don't have to get some other unit of measure of height and fatness or something. You know, we're back to traditional controls. But you'll notice the scale controls are 1 by 1 by 1. Okay, well, 1 by 1 by 1 doesn't really tell us much. And this is kind of a weird control. So the scale controls are set to 1 by 1 by 1. And we could set this scale here to 2 by 2 by 2. And we could say 2 by 2 by 2 and make this twice the size. Or we can make it, you know, 1 by 1.5 by 3. And we can make it look like that. And so we can make the cube like there. But how big is this thing actually? Well, that's where we get into something kind of weird. Sorry, 1 by 1 by 1. We'll go back here. Next here, we have the object controls. And this is the size of the object. And the object here has an actual size. By default, the cube that we make is set to a size of 200 centimeters by 200 centimeters by 200 centimeters. Now, by default, the center of this is at the 0 point. So this here, if we look at the Steve here, you can see the center of this is here at the 0 point. Again, we'll turn on the enabled. Right, it's right here in the center. So it's 200 by 200 by 200. So it's 100 this way by 100 this way. It's 100 back by 100 forward, 100 up by 100 down. It's 200 by 200 by 200. And so that's the size of this. So we can go here and we can adjust the size controls here. And we can say the size of this is maybe some kind of we'll make a shoebox here. So we'll make this, we'll leave this 100. On the Y, we'll leave this to 40. And we'll leave this to X-axis, we'll leave this to, or maybe we'll leave it at 40 as well. And so we have this kind of shoebox, little tiny little shoebox. Maybe we'll make the Z 60, and so it's a little wider of a shoebox. Maybe we'll make this to 125 or something and have this little shoebox here. So this shoebox is set to 125 by 40 by 60. And this is the size of it. So it gives you two units of measure, the size versus the scale. Now you're going to encounter this on occasion where you say, okay, the coordinates are 1 by 1 by 1 based on 125 by 40 by 60. But then your boss comes in and she says, hey, I love this cube, I love the shoebox, I love the way it is. Can we double it in size? Well, it's easier to go, make this 2 to 2 to 2 and make this double in size than it is to go back and say, hey, what's 125 times 2? That'd be 250. And what's 40 times 2? That'd be 80. And 60 times 2 is 120. Man, sometimes it gets complicated. Sometimes it gets complicated to do math. I know that's not really crazy math, but if I said, quadruple this, and then you had to get, now I have to do, 4 times the size of this. No, I can just go to coordinates and just do 4 times as big. I was working on a project once and I was getting 3D models from somebody else, and somebody made some really complicated 3D models. I'm not talking about boxes or cubes or shoe boxes or whatever it may be. I'm talking really complicated 3D models, and they gave me this really complicated stuff, and I needed to make everything bigger. And it was all component parts of a thing that put together, like fit together and turned into one big thing. And I had to make this as one big thing to fit together. I couldn't do that with just, trying to do the math here of all these controls, because there's a bunch of different controls. So what I did was I just made them, 10 by 10 by 10, and made them much bigger based on that size that's there. So we're going to go back to 1 by 1 by 1, and we'll see it there. Now, a couple things. We had a control for move tool, so move was E, R was rotate, and lastly we have T for scale. Now, scale is going to work a little bit weirdly, and I will explain scale the best I can. The scale control doesn't actually adjust the scale, because why would you want to adjust the scale? You want to just go in here and type in whole numbers, 2 or 3, whatever. Scale control is actually going to adjust the size. And so we'll look at the scale controls and adjust the size. Now, I'm going to explain something weird that won't make sense right now. Later on in future lessons, you're going to be like, aha, I remember, lessons ago that Chad was going to explain this and it's going to be really complicated and it was going to be really bizarre. And now I understand it makes sense now. If I go to scale and I grab the y-axis here, and you notice when I hover over it, it turns this to white, and I grab the y-axis here and I pull this up and make this bigger, I'm going to make everything bigger. And I pull the blue axis and I say, cool, I make everything bigger. And I pull the red axis and I say here, look, I made everything bigger. It made the whole thing bigger. Why does this make everything bigger? Why doesn't this just make the z-axis bigger? Why doesn't this just make the x-axis bigger? Why does this make everything bigger? Well, the answer is Cinema 4D is complicated. It's a complicated relationship. It is a complicated relationship, and it's just because of the way that these things work and the way these objects work, they end up being a little bit complicated here, and they have some weird ideas of how they work and what they do. So let's go back we'll start back here, normally here, and we'll show this here. 200 by 200 by 200. This is the way the cube looked. What you'll notice is I'll hit the E key, which will move back to the move tool. So we're here at 200 by 200 by 200, we're at 1 by 1 by 1, and we're at the 0 axis, and everything's normal here. Cinema 4D recognizes that this is confusing, that when I go to the T key, E, R, and T, when I go to the T key and try to make this bigger, it makes everything bigger on the size. And that's not fun. So it gave us some controls here, and you'll see these tiny little orange guys, or yellow guys. These little yellow guys here are actual controls to adjust the size. They say, hey, listen, we recognize we made things difficult for you because this doesn't make sense. It doesn't. So here's the deal. We made these little controls for you. And these little controls are to adjust the little things. And they actually exist when you're in move mode, E key, or this button here. Hey look, this control works to move just this. If we're in rotation, boom. Look, this control here will scale this up automatically. It's a little hidden control that will scale this up automatically. And then when we're in scale mode, this. So it doesn't matter which mode we're in. I can make this size whatever I want to with these little tiny guys there. These little tiny guys here, these little yellow guys, are usually more precise controls for adjusting different components. And these will adjust the size of here. So if I go to the object, now I'm at 270.559 by 97.1734. It's pretty precise there like so. So I can do this there. So I can jump between E, R, and T, but T at this case is just going to make this whole thing bigger. One of the interesting things is, since T is going to make this whole thing bigger, right? If I grab here and pull this, it makes the whole thing bigger. If I grab here and pull this, it makes the whole thing bigger. If I grab here and pull this, it makes the whole thing bigger. So why am I grabbing anywhere? Because if I grab this, it's going to make the whole thing bigger. If I grab over here, make the whole thing bigger. I'll show you a trick. Ready? Watch this. Do you see the little slider that exists right here? And you're like, no, Chad, I don't see a slider. Maybe I should lie and just say I see a slider. Guess what? There is a slider that exists right here. If I pull here and drag left to right, it makes the whole thing bigger. If I drag over here and drag left to right, it makes the whole thing bigger. I can drag anywhere in the screen, and a magical slider, invisible slider, just kind of exists This is just, you'll see me do this all the time, just make things bigger. I'll just grab things, make them bigger. Because I don't need to grab here to make the whole thing bigger. I can just grab here and go, yeah, makes the whole thing bigger. Here, again, my precise controls to make this bigger, to make this bigger. I can make different parts of this bigger, like so. But here, I can make the whole thing bigger. Amazing, amazing, easy. All right, so we're going to take Steve. Notice, by the way, when I clicked on scale, the attributes are now showing me the attributes for the scale control. I told you this program is extremely context sensitive, which means when I click on something else, click on position, it's going to show me the position controls. In order to see Steve's controls again, I have to click back on Steve to see the Steve's controls. It's annoying, but it is what it is. Now here, I'm going to move this back here again to 200 by 200 by 200 and leave this here at 200 by 200. There's a control here for segments. Right now we don't really care about segments. We'll get to segments in a future lesson. I will talk about segments there. The segments right now are 1 by 1 by 1. You could set this to 3 by 3 by 3, but you won't really care. It won't make a big difference out of this. You won't really see this, but beneath this you'll see separate surfaces, a control here for separate surfaces, and you'll see a control for filleting. This is called filleting, not called filleting, not called filleting. It's 2 L's. It is filleting. And filleting makes, for this cube, for Steve the cube, allows us to have some roundy edges on the cube. And roundy edges, we turn that on, and all of a sudden, I'm going to hit Command R. I'm going to hit Command R just so we can see how pretty this is. Oh, look at that, little roundy edges. Now, my roundy edges are set to a fillet radius of 7 centimeters. That's because the size of this, I can make this bigger, I can make this 15 centimeters, and you have some more roundedness. I can make this smaller, make this 2 centimeters. There's a little bit of roundiness. You see a little bit of rounded edges on the edges. It's a little nice there. I can make this 50 centimeters, boom, and make this there. And the problem is that when I make this 50 centimeters, you'll start to notice some real chunkiness on the edges here. So when I hit Command R, you'll see, oh, it looks a little bit chunky. It's not really nice rounded edges. And that is because the subdivisions are not what we want it to be. Let's look here. I'm going to show you a shortcut. In here in the display, you will see in the display menu, this is the smaller menu on this viewport. The display menu will show you a control that says garage shading. I like saying garage shading. I don't know what garage shading means, but it's garage shading. And garage shading, it looks like, well, it looks like this. It shades this in a way that has it a little darker over here and has this there and looks pretty like that. And this is called garage shading. Okay, well, we're going to look at a different shading type here. We're going to go here and go to display and show garage shading plus lines. You'll notice on the side here there is a shortcut for this. Garage shading plus lines is NB. What does that mean? It's N tilde B. Well, that means if you want to see garage shading for these kind of shortcuts, you're going to hit the one letter first, stop, and then hit the second letter. So I'll show you how this looks. Right now we're in NA, which is garage shading. But if we hit N, a window pops up, and then we hit B, and then it shows garage shading with lines. And this is our lines now. If I go back to Steve here and I turn off the filleting, you'll see, hey, look, I've set this to 3 by 3 by 3. So it's 3 this way, 3 this way, and 3 this way. If I set this back to 1 by 1 by 1, it's now no lines. If I set this to 5 by 5 by 5, I now have 5 by 5 by 5 subdivisions. So it's broken into segments. But I don't really care about that. We'll set this back to 3 by 3 by 3, and we'll have it there. What I care about is the filleting subdivisions. And the filleting subdivisions, because, we'll set this to like 20, because it subdivides this 1, 2, 3 here, if I have this and I look at this, sometimes on the edges it might look a little bit chunky. So what do I want to do? I want to increase my subdivisions. Now, increasing your subdivisions is going to increase render time. It's going to take longer to render. So I don't want to set my subdivisions to like 300 or something. That would be insane. Now there's 300 subdivisions in here. That's crazy. But I don't know, 8? Yeah, 8 looks less chunky. Looks smoother across there. So you're gonna determine what looks smooth. How many is enough to make it look smooth? So now it has 8 subdivisions across the filleting. So we have those controls there like so. You'll also notice that now, once I added filleting, I do have controls here to adapt the filleting. So now I can go here, and these little yellow guys, these little precision guys, will adapt the filleting. So I can make this bigger, and I can pull these in different ways and pull these like so to change how the filleting works. And all of these just basically change the filleting radius evenly, and so that's there. But you'll start to see more controls as I change different things about this. Again, once I render this, those lines go away. So those lines go away and they become much smoother. Command R, render this, it goes away. All right, so now we have Steve. I'm going to take Steve. We're going to hit the move tool, E for move tool, and we're going to move this over here and just have this out of the way. Let's make something else. Let's hold down the cube, and we're going to hold down the cube, and we're going to go here and look at this in terms of, well, let's look at a cylinder. And we'll make a cylinder here. Now we have a cylinder. Well, the cylinder has basic controls. We can name this cylinder here, name, and I'll show you a trick. We can also go up here and rename it. So here, this is where it gets really small. So let's take a look. Here, up here, we can click here and double click, or we can click and hit return, and we can rename this, and we'll call this, I don't know, Mark. Mark with a C for Marcus. And now there's Mark, and Mark has controls, and I'll show you really quickly. Mark has controls here that you can see here. Okay, so here's Mark, and here there's two little tiny little buttons here. Cinema 4D loves the tiny little buttons. These two little circles here. If I click this one, watch this. If I click this, when it's gray, this top one is default viewport visibility. If I click it once, it turns green, which changes this to on viewport visibility. Click it again, it becomes red, which is off viewport visibility. Click it again, it becomes off. So this is a toggle going between these three modes. Down here, you have another circle. This is render visibility. Off, on, default, off, on, default, on, off, default. This is nothing, green, red, there. And then over here, enabled or not enabled. There's a checkbox for enabled. So most of the controls in the basic controls, you can control right from the object manager here if you want to go and find these little tiny little buttons. They're sometimes hard to see, but you get quicker with your mouse at hitting them, and you're able to reach them. Let's look at the coordinates. So again, you have your X coordinate, you have your Y coordinate, you have your Z coordinate. Great, you have those controls there like so. That's pretty normal. Again, with your rotation, R for rotation. Oops, not 0R. Let's hit 0, enter. R for rotation. You do have your rotation controls for heading, pitch, and bank. Heading, which the pitch, and the bank. There we go. I'm going to undo a couple times. Now the object controls. On the object controls, this is specific object controls that are different than the cube. Steve the cube, the cylinder object, Mark, has a radius. Make this bigger or smaller. And has a height. You'll see two precision controls here for radius and height. So you can adjust the radius and the height, and this will adjust the radius and the height. You'll also see beneath that, they have height segments and rotation segments. So they have two controls for height segments and rotation segments here. And so right now, the rotation segments are 16, and the height segments are 4. If you wanted to, you could go to the rotation segments double. And you may say to yourself, Chad, 16, what's double 16? I don't remember. I'm going to show you a trick. Watch this. If I go in here and I type in 16 times 2, it'll tell me, boom, 32. Guess what? These little number boxes, they'll do math. They'll do complicated math. So if you did like 16 times 2 minus 4 divided by 3, you guys know what that is, right? Yeah, of course you do. Yeah, that's 31. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I don't know. You know, it can do pretty complicated math and do pretty good math there inside of those little boxes. So you can use those boxes if you don't know the numbers and work them there like so. But now we have a little bit smoother, because before 16, I don't know, 16 might have looked a little bit chunky. Command R might have looked a little bit chunky on the edges there. Maybe we'll go up to 32. We'll double that, and we'll go to a little smoother roundness. Yeah, that looks a little nicer. A little nicer, smoother roundness. Again, do as much as you can without, you know, destroying your render times. But we'll select the 32. Height segments at 4 right now. For now, I think height segments at 4 are okay. We'll be fine there. I'll tell you a thing I used to do. I used to do this thing where I would go in here and go to coordinates, and I wanted this thing. I'd have a cylinder like this, and I'd go in here to coordinates and be like, okay, on the, this would be the bank. On the bank, I'd want this to be 90 degrees, and I'd go 90 degrees, and I'd set this and turn this 90 degrees, and it would be 90 degrees now, here like so. And then I wanted to be facing the other way, so I'd be 0 this way, but I wanted to be facing on the pitch, and I wanted to be 90 degrees here, and it'd be facing that way. And it'd be like, awesome, great, cool, it's facing that way. Amazing. And then I would do the thing where if you click and drag, you can pull the bank and you turn it 90 degrees. Now, you're probably never going to hit 90 degrees. I hit like 92.3, which is not cool. But here's a trick. If you click in this and you hold down Shift, it'll go in increments of 5s. By default, it will go in increments of 5s. You can change it and it'd be like 90. Cool, hit 90. Now let me go backwards and drag this way and I go shift, 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 shift. Hold down shift the whole time and go 90. Cool, and hit 90. And great. And I used to do that all the time. I used to know now it's 90 on the heading and 90 on the bank, and that'd be great. And that's what I used to do. And then I realized I'm a big dummy. Yeah, I'm a big dummy. Because here, under objects, here, look. The orientation. Positive on the x, negative on the x. Positive on the y, negative on the y. Positive on the z. I can just hit this button and point it whichever direction I want to. X, y, or z. Just it's on the y-axis, it's on the x-axis, it's on the z-axis. It's going to be there like so. I mean, that's so much easier. Why didn't I just do that? Yeah, I used to sit there all the time typing in 90s. So for certain objects, the cube doesn't really matter which way it's facing, but for certain objects that have kind of a directionality to them, you'll see this orientation control. Beyond that, the cylinder also has some other controls, including a caps control. You can have whether the caps, so what do we have caps in this? So is there caps in this? Yes. We can turn caps off, and now it's hollow. So now it's hollow in the center of this, and now we have kind of a hollow tube. And then later, we'll talk about how many segments from the caps. Right now, it's only one segment of the caps. There is more rotation segments, but we can crank this up and have more segments on the caps. We may want that for certain kind of wheels or something like that. You know, we had a object like this that was turned on this axis and was, you know, maybe a little bit smaller. We could have certain kind of wheels that had different parts there and have different level of caps. So caps there or no caps. And again, we have filleting. We have rounded edges on this. Again, you have segments and the radius of the filleting. You can crank up the segments and the radius and have these controls there and have wheels like there. So there. And again, it might look chunky still and I might want more, you know, more rotation segments. Maybe I do 32 times 2, which of course would be 64. Now it looks a little bit smoother. So that's Mark there. That's Mark. We're going to hit the E key. And we're going to go here and pull this over here and have this like so. And then we'll grab something else here. We'll grab a capsule. We'll play with a capsule. So the capsule, again, has basic controls, has coordinate controls, object controls. Let's look. Capsule has a radius. So the radius of the capsule, the size of the capsule, the height of the capsule. And again, that's manipulable here and here. We can make this wider. We can make this taller. Fatter, taller. There we go. We have the number of height segments, the number of cap segments, and the number of rotation segments. And we also have an orientation for this. We can put this in different directions. We have these controls. We also have a slice control. This is weird. There's a slice control. We can turn a slice on and slice this in half. And now we have controls to where it slices from to where it slices to. We can have this sliced open like this. So we have this built like there. There was also a slice control for Mark the cylinder here. We could have those controls there. And again, you can add more points, more segments here, you know, to have 20 by 20 by 20 or something. And then we have something smoother, a smooth looking capsule. Depending on the size, we could have a smoother looking capsule. So some controls there for the capsule. We'll take the capsule, put the capsule, I don't know, somewhere over here, over there like so. And you can look and hold this down, and you can look at your other controls here. So you have some other different things here. My personal favorite, honestly, and you can look at the other ones here. We can look at the other ones if you want to. We can look at the landscape. You can make a landscape. There you go. That's kind of cool. Undo that. You'll see the figure makes a person. Look at that. There's a figure. He's got limited controls, but there's some more you can do with him once we start playing with him more. We'll undo that. There's some other controls here. The oil tank. Little oil tank there has some radius and height controls. You can also slice that. Also add some cap height, you know, make it really big. There's the oil tanker there. Cool. We'll delete that. We'll go here and see the sphere. The sphere is just a rounded sphere. Here's the thing. The sphere always looks chunky. So I'm going to hit NA to go back to my controls. NA to go back to my Grad shading. And it always looks chunky. But there's actually a setting on the sphere that says render perfect. And it always looks wonderful. Man, look at that. It always renders perfectly. If you didn't, for some reason you didn't want it to render perfectly, you could turn off render perfect, and then it would look chunky. But render perfect, man, fixes it. Always looks beautiful. So I don't know. Yeah, render perfectly. Make it perfect. It's a sphere. It should be perfect. But if you wanted to, you could set the segments here to 64, and then it would look better here. So it wouldn't matter whether it rendered perfect or not. So you have that control for there. But you know, what the heck? Let's just leave it at what it was, 32, and then have it look chunky, and then say render perfect. There's also types. So if we hit NB we click here and we hit NB for garage shading with lines, you'll see that it has these squares here. You can go to the sphere and you can actually set this to different types. So you can have different types of standard, hemispheric, that's weird, it makes a half a circle. Tetrahedrons, which changes them to triangles with some weird combination to make it, I don't know, something there. Hexahedrons, which does weird other kind of, rhombus shapes. Octahedrons, which does triangles in a different combination. And then icosahedron, which, I don't know. I guess, if you played a lot of role-playing games, you would understand what all these things are. But we're going to go standard, and we're going to sit in standard and have these there like so. And so that's the sphere. Again, I'll get rid of the sphere. While we're here, goodbye sphere, and we'll see what else we got. I really like, so here's my thing. I really like, for some reason, I like the cone. I don't know why. I like the cone. We'll have the cone here. So the cone has a basic controls, which we've already seen. We can call the basic cone, Roy. And here we have coordinates for the cone, so you can move the cone. And we can rotate. R for rotate. We can rotate the cone and have it there, whatever it may be. But the cone has object controls, so it has a top radius, which right now the top radius is set to 0, which means you really can't do anything with the top radius. But if you open this up a little bit, you'll see there's a top radius here that you can grab. There's a bottom radius that you can grab. There's a height that you can grab. There is the number of height segments, so there. Number of rotation segments, you can crank this up and make this more rotation. And then orientation, you can move this on different axes and different planes. So different controls there. We'll put this back to Y. And then there's caps. Caps. Now we have something interesting. So does it have caps? Yes. Or it doesn't have caps. Now we have no caps, no cap. It's capless. But we can have caps, and we can have this have caps, and then we can have cap filleting. And so you can have some roundness on the cap, and you can crank up this cap here and change the height and change the number of segments, and then you can have a cap on the bottom. So if you had this here on reverse, you could have a cap on the bottom and say here a bottom cap, and then you can have, again, controls there. And you will notice that here I now have controls to adjust how this cap opens up and what the cap looks like and how big it is, etc. So now I have these more precise controls here. I should actually learn what these controls are called. Again, I don't have enough roundness here, so I may want to go back to the caps of Roy and say on the caps, let's add some more cap, or the fillet segments. And then more filleting segments. So now Roy looks like there. So now I have all those controls there like so. Now we've been playing a lot. What I haven't talked about here immediately, and this is the last thing I should talk about for this lesson, is I should talk about moving around in this viewport. So we're in perspective viewport. Okay, I'm going to show you kind of a couple different ways to move around the viewport. If ever it gets weird, you can go to View, and you can go here to go to Frame Default. There's no shortcut to this, but you can go to the View menu, this little sub-menu here, and go to View, Frame Default, and this will put you back in default view, which is this view here. This is this with this kind of angled view with the X facing this way, and the Y facing this way, and the Z kind of showing you backwards there. Okay, so a couple controls you have. Up top here, again, really small controls up top here. There's a little hand, and the little hand, you can click the hand and grab, and you can move the camera left or right or up or down. So you can just grab this hand, and if you grab the hand and pull, you can move this left or right or up or down. Up here next to this is a little arrow that's called scale, which is to zoom in or out. So you can zoom in or out and zoom in or out like so. And that's there. So that's way number 2. And then here, you can orbit the camera, grab this little circle guy, and this little circle guy right here looks like this. We'll just zoom in a little bit closer here. We'll get a little bit closer here. You can take this and you can orbit this around. And you can orbit around in a circular pattern and get all kinds of view things. I'll zoom out so you can see this. I just wanted you to be able to see the button here. We will orbit around like so, and we'll orbit into different directions and have this kind of orbiting control here. Amazing. Cool. Truth, I never use these guys. I know they're great, left and right, up or down, zoom in, zoom out, whatever it may be, and orbit. I never use these guys. We're going to go back to frame default, view, frame default, and we're back here to back to normal. Here's the truth. There's a couple other ways to do this. If I'm using my mouse, if I hold in the Option key, and I hit the left mouse button, I can orbit. If I hold down the Option key and I hit the right mouse button, I can zoom in and zoom out. If I hold down the Option key and I hold the middle mouse button, I can move physically left or right. This is tracking left or right, like so. So I can hold down left, orbit, right, zoom, track left, right. This is if I'm holding the Alt or the Option key, I have those options there. Here's the other truth. I don't use that either. I don't know why. I don't use that either. So I'm going to show you the one that I use all the time. Why did I waste my time showing you stuff I don't do? I don't know, just in case you want to do it. Some other people love using the Alt key for moves. I know other programs, other 3D modeling programs out there love to use the Alt key for moves. I like using 1, 2, and 3. If I hold down 1, I can move left and right. This is left mouse button holding down 1. If I hold down 2, I can zoom in, zoom out. This is left mouse button only. This is my main mouse button only, zooming in and zooming out. If I hold down 3, I can now orbit. Here's why I like this way best. Well, I like it for 2 reasons. 1, it's right close to the ER and T keys. And again, ER and T is move, scale, move, rotate, and scale. So it's move, rotate, and scale is ER and T, and I have those keys there. And I have ER and T, and I have right above it, I have kind of off to the left a little bit, I have 1, 2, and 3. And so 1 can physically move me, 2 can zoom me in and out, and 3 can rotate me around. ER and T do the same thing, and I have those kind of controls for the object. So if I want to move the object, I can hit E. If I want to rotate the object, I can hit R. But if I want to move the viewport around, I can hold down 1, I can hold down 2, I can hold down 3. That's reason 1 I like that there. I like those controls of 1, 2, and 3. And I you know, right-clicking always feels weird to move something with right-clicking. I tend to be more of a right-click to open up a menu, which I can do, but right-clicking to move, even when I'm holding the Option key, just feels awkward. I don't know, it just feels weird. I'm not used to it. So 1, 2, and 3 are my friends. Second reason why 1, 2, and 3 are my friends is because if I want to rotate around here, notice when I rotate here, orbit around here, let me use the correct terminology. When I orbit around here, it orbits around the center, which is this cone that's in the center, this little gumdrop that I have here, it orbits around here. But say I want to orbit differently. Well, you'll notice that if I hover over to the corner of this cube here, if I hover over to the corner of this cube and I hold down 3, I can orbit around the corner of this cube. And now my orbit is kind of moving with the axis point. You'll see this little crosshair, little yellow crosshair to orbit around there. But if I wanted to orbit around this, I could hold down 3, and I could click on this, and I could orbit around this. And this would put this as the center of my orbit. And so this gives me more precision control. Same thing with zoom. If I zoom in here, it just zooms into the center. But if I wanted to zoom into this object right here, I could hold down 2 and zoom in towards this object, as opposed to just zooming in towards the center. So this is specific to where I'm clicking. If I click on an object, I can zoom into that object. If I move, I can move in relationship to that object. Or if I orbit, I can orbit around this object like so. So this gives me more precision controls than just doing these guys up here. So I like this a little bit better. Now, I'm going to show you some quick shortcuts that I think shortcuts are good. I think shortcuts are your friend. Right now I have this looking like this. If I want all of these objects framed in the screen, I can hit the H key, and the H key here, right here if you go to View, and it says Frame Geometry. This is to frame all of my geometry. So Frame Geometry is set here. So even if I was like this, and I was zoomed in super close, whoops, let me hold on 2, and I was zoomed in super close right here, and I was like this in here, and I could hit the H key, and it would be like, hey, let's fix this. Boom, and everything's in the center, everything's on the screen, and I can see everything. There it is, perfectly fine. So even if I was like this, and I was facing this way, I went, man, where's that capsule? H key brings everything to the screen and shows me everything in the screen. I can see everything. Cool, I feel much better about there. Excellent. If I wanted to see a specific thing, if I wanted to frame one thing, I can click on that one thing, and I can hit the O key. That is frame a selected object. The O key So I click on Mark and be like, let me just see Mark. O key is going to jump me and show me just Mark. Now, here's a quick little helpful thing. If I don't know where the capsule is, and I see just Mark here, mark the cylinder here, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm just looking at Mark here. Again, I can hit the H key and go back out, but I want to go to O and see Mark, and now I'm just looking at Mark here, but I also want to know where the capsule is in relationship to Mark. If I click on the capsule in the Objects Manager, you will see when I click on the capsule, there's a little arrow right here. And that little arrow is like, hey, dude, look over there. Look over there. That's where the capsule is. Look over there. Yeah, it's over there. So again, now I could kind of navigate and find roughly where this capsule is. Oh, there he is. There he is. Oh, but where's Steve in relationship to where the capsule is? Steve's, oh, he's over there somewhere. Roy's over there somewhere. Mark's over there somewhere too. So it tells me where these objects are. Obviously, I could just hit O and just jump back to Mark, or I could click on Roy and hit O and jump over to Roy and see Roy. I could hit H and see everything on the screen, but I have those controls there like so. All right, last thing I'm going to give to you, and then we're going to take a break from this, and we'll get into future lessons. We'll play with some more stuff and some more ideas. There'll be lots of shortcuts, lots of controls, and some things that I might learn in the meantime. Here, so I'll hit 3. I'm going to move this guy over, move the capsule over. We're going to hit the E key and move the capsule over and put this like there, and like there. You may be familiar that if I do something, and I make something bigger or smaller, I can hit undo by hitting Command Z. If I'm on a PC, Control Z, obviously. Everyone knows that Control Z is your universal undo there. And for this, inside of here, inside of there, redo is Command Y. And so Command Y is move it back, so it's redo, undo, redo. Command Z, Command Y, I don't know why, but Command Y is to redo, undo, redo. There's a separate function. Command Shift Z is to not undo. It is to undo camera moves. So if I go like this and move to here and I hit undo, it's not going to undo the fact that I moved. The idea of undo camera moves would be Command Shift Z, and that will undo camera moves. Now if I do Command Shift Z, watch this. I can go here and hit Command Shift Z a whole bunch of times. And this was everything I did with the camera, moving the camera around. I'm not moving any of the objects around. This is just to undo the camera moves. Occasionally you want to undo the camera moves, and so Command Shift Z will eventually put me back to probably frame default. I'm just undoing all of these camera moves. There we go. Now we're back to frame default. That's how this was by default. And so that function exists there. There's lots of other stuff in Cinema 4D, and there's lots of other submenus to go into, and there's 100 other ways to do this, and people will probably comment that, oh, I do it this way instead. Yeah, there's probably lots of stuff to go over and lots to cover. This will be some ground floor, basic kind of stuff to cover in terms of making stuff. And we didn't even make stuff yet. I just wanted to show you how the interface looks. In a future lesson, we'll go over and we'll start making some stuff, and we'll start playing with some ideas of building and creating those things there. All right, that's all we're going to do for today. Hope you got something out of this. We'll see you next time.